Hi, my name is Cliff, and this week in Congress, I want to share the top 10 bills that were viewed on congress.gov on the week of June the 12th. So, starting with number one. Number one is Senate Bill 1241, titled Combating Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing, and Counterfeiting. This was sponsored by Chuck Grassley. So this bill was introduced a little over a month before, and the bill is generally there to help the Department of Justice combat the transfer of money across the U.S. border. So it expands the reach beyond just cash to things like prepaid cards and digital currencies like Bitcoin. So this bill does seem like it's a direct response to troubles that the DOJ had in getting criminal convictions against those committing money laundering and other related crimes. But on the flip side, those against the bill, largely in the digital currency community, were against it because it could lead to fairly harsh penalties for presumably accidental violations by just normal citizens. Number two, Senate Bill 722, titled Countering Iran's Destabilizing Activities Act, introduced by Bob Corker. So this bill recently passed the Senate, but it was stalled in the House. People were saying that it might have been because there was pressure from the White House to not pass the bill. But so this bill, it's about sanctioning Iran for its ballistic missile program, for their support of terrorist groups, violations of the UN arms embargo, and other human rights violations. But those against this bill were saying that it goes against the spirit of the Iran nuclear deal that was reached by the Obama administration. So it would give Iran a reason to restart their nuclear program. So that's the flip side of it. And then, another thing that was added to this bill was sanctions against Russia for their interference with the U.S. election. But this bill has not passed. So number three was H.R., our House of Representatives 367, called the Hearing Protection Act of 2017. So this one's a fairly popular bill. I think I've seen it in multiple leaks. So the main question behind this bill is whether silencers should be more accessible. So like one side says hunters should have easier access, so they're more likely to use them in the field. So that's why it's called hearing protection, to protect hunters' hearing. And the other side says that silencers make the job of law enforcement officers much more difficult. What the bill does is it generally makes it much cheaper and much quicker to get silencers. So number four was actually the Russia sanctions that was attached to the other bill that included Iran sanctions. Number five, this one is a little bit longer because this one is the House Bill 1628, which was the American Health Care Act of 2017, introduced by Diane Black. So this one was the first House bill that was passed and sent to the Senate. It was, there was a lot to this bill, and I'll try to go over just a few of the major items. So one of the major goals of this bill is to create a deficit so that they can use that deficit later for tax reform, so that they can give tax breaks to presumably the wealthy. So with that, one major item was a large cut to Medicaid, which is the healthcare for the poor. So under Obamacare, more people became eligible for Medicaid. So under this bill, the newly eligible people would no longer qualify after a few years. And also, if you are on Medicaid and for whatever reason you become unqualified at one point, then you won't be able to go back. So that's what this bill had done. And it also gets rid of a lot of the taxes that were increased due to Obamacare to like pay for Obamacare. And then there's also the changing of subsidies from need to age-based. So it doesn't matter how much you need it, but it's more dependent on how old you are. So the older you are, the more money you get. The younger you are, the less money you get. But the other thing is that under Obamacare, the old were only allowed to be charged 3 times more than the young were. Whereas in this bill, it would increase that to 5 times. So what this bill does, in a sense, is to make it much more expensive for the elderly to pay for health insurance. So 2 more things that I'll kind of touch on. This bill basically made the individual mandate toothless because it made the penalty $0. So, so if you didn't get insurance, you wouldn't be charged anything, even if you're violating the individual mandate to buy insurance. But to kind of keep people on healthcare, what they decided to do was that if you happen to break coverage for more than 3 months, then when you decide to come back onto the health exchange, then they'll be able to charge you 30% more for a year, and then you're back on the normal schedule. So the last item that I'll kind of mention is the change that got conservatives on board at the last minute. And what it was it included a waiver that states could apply for that would allow them to not cover essential health benefits. So this would mean that insurers can provide cheaper plans because they might not include things like covering pregnancies. So the CBO estimated that 23 million people would lose their health insurance by 2026 under this bill. And one side says that this would increase access to healthcare by making it cheaper, meaning more people would be able to actually afford them. And the other side says that that even though more people can afford them, it wouldn't actually be insurance that's very usable. So the argument here really lies between whether you believe healthcare is a right for people or whether healthcare should be a commodity. So the next bill, that one was a little bit long, but the next bill is the Financial Choice Act of 2017. This was House of Representatives, the House Bill number 10, sponsored by Jeb Hensarling. This bill was passed on June 8th, and it rolls back a lot of regulations from Dodd-Frank bill, which was the bill that was created in response to the Great Recession of 2008. So one of the stated goals of this bill is to reduce regulations on smaller regional and community banks, which people agree that it would actually do. In addition, though, it would also largely help big banks. Generally, though, this version of the bill is viewed as unpassable within the Senate. So it'd be better to see what the Senate does with this bill before making any more comments. Next was the House Bill 38, the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act of 2017, sponsored by Richard Hudson. So this has been a bill that has been around for a while, but basically what it does is if you have a permit to carry a concealed weapon in one state, then you'll be allowed to use that permit anywhere else in the country. So, they're saying that a lot of times when people with these concealed carry permits are traveling, they're not really sure what to do, because there's so many different laws depending on what state you go to. But the other side, what they say is that, it does subvert the state's rights to stricter gun laws, what this bill does, in addition to a similar bill in the Senate, though, is that it allows people to get a permit in a different state. So, California has stricter gun laws. So if you couldn't get a concealed carry permit here, then you could get it in a different state. And then you could come back to California, and then you would now be able to use that permit from a different state, across the whole country. So, this bill probably got a little bit more popular because this was the week that the majority whip got shot during baseball practice. So, yeah. Number 8, House Bill 392, Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act of 2017, sponsored by Jason Chaffetz. So currently there's a limit that no one country can take more than 7% of a given year's visas. So, this has created a large backlog for large countries like India or China, whereas those from smaller countries are able to get their visas much quicker because there aren't as many people applying. So this bill gets rid of that limit and instead makes our system a first come, first serve. So whoever applies will get to the head of the line. So yeah, surprisingly this bill does have pretty broad bipartisan support. So I think it has a decent chance of actually passing. Number 9, Senate Bill 1094, Department of Veterans Affairs Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017, sponsored by Marco Rubio. So this bill was passed. In the Senate it was passed on June 6th and the House on June 13th, and then it was signed into law on June 23rd. So what this bill does is it made it much easier to fire employees at the VA. It does sound somewhat anti-labor, so it was kind of surprising that it was broadly supported by both parties. But I do believe that it was because of all the scandals that have rocked the Veterans Affairs Administration. So yeah, so that's probably why it passed so quickly. But yeah, it just makes it much easier to fire people. It doesn't have to be for a specific reason. There doesn't have to be, the head of the VA can fire anybody for any reason they want it. So yeah, so it doesn't protect people or things like that. The last bill for this week was House Bill 657, titled Follow the Rules Act, sponsored by Sean Duffy. So this bill passed the House on May 1st, and then passed the Senate on May 25th and was signed into law on June 14th. So this bill was a response to a federal court decision that ruled that technically whistleblowers weren't protected if they refused to violate a federal rule or regulation, whereas they were protected if they refused to violate a federal law. So basically this bill just kind of cleared that up and made it so whistleblowers are protected if they violate a federal rule or regulation, to do their whistleblowing. So yeah, so those were the top 10 bills from the week of June 12th, and I'll be back later with other things about Congress that are happening this week.